case there. So what we're gonna do is show you the other side. I think we were looking at the cylinder head where we left off last time. So we'll take a quick look over at that. All right, so what we were doing is inspecting the actual combustion chambers here, the back of the cylinder head. And really, the condition of all this is pretty good. For 220,000 miles, you can see, of course, there's some carbon buildup. But we've definitely seen engines, with half the mileage that have a lot more carbon. And again, in this case, we're not going to be reusing this cylinder head. So it's nice to see that it's in good condition. The engine was running pretty well, but we will not be reusing it. So just more informational purpose. We can see these are the intake valves here, and then the exhaust valves are a little bit smaller diameter. But again, a little bit of buildup. This would definitely be something that could be cleaned up and reused on another project if it came to that. So then the other side, we're looking down the actual cylinders themselves. You can see the tops of the pistons here. Again, a little bit of carbon buildup. And this is actually, it looks kind of gummy and soft, but it's actually like crystallized carbon on there. So again, for the mileage that this engine has, very nice condition, would be easy to clean up and reuse. In this case, again, we're going with a kind of an extreme build here. We're going to be replacing rods, pistons, cylinder head, pretty much everything except for the block. And we will be reusing the crankshaft. So again, good to see that these are in good conditions. And we're looking too down at the cylinder walls. Do we have that flashlight? So you can see down here in the cylinder walls, if the light's just right, you can actually still see the crosshatch pattern that was left from the original machining of the block. No real signs of any scoring. Really nice condition. They all pretty much look the same. Yeah, you can see that crosshatch pattern. That's part of the machining when the engine is originally assembled, and that actually helps the rings seal against the cylinder walls. It's a very specific machined pattern in there. But yeah, this will make a very excellent candidate for our build, which is good. So the next step, flip this guy back upside down.
On the right side, there's not a lot left to feed fluid out of.
Yeah, when we flipped it, we got a little more fluid out, but luckily we had pretty much drained all of it. We got a little pan down here to catch it, but I still have not found a perfect way to not end up with fluid all over the floor in this type of job. It's just kind of the way that it goes. So, all right, so hopefully you guys can see all this pretty well. So what we're gonna do is disconnect the connecting rods and pull the pistons out through the cylinders. So, actually one other thing, well, you can probably see it from there, but you can see all this structure going on here. This is, I won't say that it's uncommon. All the Hondas are this way, and it's really sort of a feature that is included in generally more high performance engines, which is kind of cool. Even these little economy Honda engines, which is why they handle boost and extra horsepower so well. So, all right, got our cameraman here. But so what this is, so these are the main caps here that hold the crankshaft in place. So there's 10 of them, or sorry, 10 bolts, 5 main caps, but then they're linked together. And what that does is it increases the strength Now they're all tied together, versus having all the stress on one individual bolt. And actually what we can show you, this is, we got an example here from another engine, but normally they would all be individual caps that would sit in there. And so it's got this structure holding them all together, which gives it a lot more strength, which is exactly why it's these kind of features that Honda included into what would be just an economy engine, made for gas mileage and long life. But they really did kind of over-design this stuff, which is what allows us to push. We're going to be looking at around 350 horsepower without really any serious modifications to the block. And,
what is stock horsepower on this thing?
The stock horsepower is like 108, 109, somewhere around there. It's just barely over 100. So we're going to be looking at right around 3 times what Honda intended for it, and because of these types of little design features are what allows that to be done without any serious modification, which is pretty cool. So what we're going to do is rotate the crankshaft, which now that we've got everything disconnected, it rotates nice and freely. Now, the only downside of having these in here is it makes accessing the rod caps here a little bit more tricky, but it still has enough space to do it. So I think that'll actually work there. That should be probably a 12. Let's see if I was able to misplace my 12. Well, that fell down into the block, but that's not going to cause us any problems. The other thing I'm going to do here is if we look down at the front here, this is the oil pump. It's a little hard to tell, but this structure here is a separate piece from the rest of the block. So this is the oil pump itself, and what really gives that away is that this is the pickup tube. Now, of course, this is all upside down, so normally, the oil pan's full of, there you go. Normally the bottom of the oil pan's here, and you've got, oil, about this deep or so. And so then this is what picks up the oil to feed it into the oil pump. And so this is something we're also gonna pull out of the way.
Do you intend on pulling out the oil pump today?
I am not going to be pulling out the oil pump today. But once we get this stuff apart, you'll be able to see, well, maybe we will. We'll see how it goes. Once we get a little further, it'll be more obvious what that is. This is, of course, the oil pan gasket. We were remarking earlier, this is actually a really nice Velcro aftermarket. You can see compared to all the other plastic and rubber stuff we've removed that was incredibly brittle, this is actually a really nice gasket that somebody put in here at some point along the way.
You did say earlier on in the build that that wasn't the original oil drain pan either. The teardown.
Colin's car.
Yeah, we're talking about Colin. Yeah, Colin's got a nearly. And we were discussing some of the issues that he was having. So that's the oil pickup. Pretty straightforward. Just to make sure any big chunks don't get picked up. But then after the oil gets sucked into the oil pump and then through the rest of the engine. So this is just kind of a screen just to make sure that nothing large would get sucked up in there, and then the filter itself make sure there's no small particles. All right, so we got that out of our. Shift this over. That should give us access there. It's the 10 that's still on there.
12 is in front of.
So again, you may notice these nuts are just falling down in there, but that's all going to come out once we get these. Get this little rotation. Notice I'm kind of going about this a little bit randomly. Not actually any particular cylinder head and some of those things. There's no real particular order here. If we weren't planning on doing a full disassembly, we usually would take out just things or something, or just pop one out, do that, put it back. Everything up. I'm not going to be reusing a whole heck of this stuff, so not too worried about where they go. A quick little here of what's going on, and this is from a different Honda motor, but you can see, that these were the bolts that we were just taking off on the ends, and then these two pieces split apart, and then that's the connecting rod that then holds the piston. So we're going to be separating these, and then the piston will actually come down through the other side of the engine. There's not always a super graceful way of doing this. What I'm going to do is just see if I can get a tap on the back of these. Oh, that was easy. So what I'm doing is just tapping the ends of those studs to separate the two pieces. So now all that's really holding the pistons in is just the friction between the rings and the cylinder walls themselves.
So you've only tapped in half of the things, haven't you? Or did the other
well,
ones
we got pretty lucky. Yeah,
I see.
they just split right in half. Sometimes you got to come after both of them a little bit. So what we're gonna do. See if we can get this guy down through here. It's just a little longer. So what we're going to do is we're going to pause that just for a minute, because I'm kind of finding these crankshaft caps here kind of getting in the way. So what we're going to do is just pop these off of here, get these out of the way. So again, if we were doing just a simple ring job, this is not a step that we would normally take, but this will allow us much better access.
Then again, if you were doing a simple ring job, well, are these bolts that you're taking out also the type that once you've pulled, they've stretched and they should be replaced?
These are reusable. They're not quite as long. The big deal with the reusing the head bolts is just they're so long that they're a lot more prone to stretching.
The only reason I ask is because it strikes me that even though it's the additional work of taking out these 10 extra bolts, it also gives you so much easier access to everything.
Yeah.
So even if you were doing a simple ring job.
Yeah, and I guess it kind of also gets into the point of like what really is a simple ring job, and like if you're really going to go this far, it's probably worthwhile to replace the main bearings, and like any good project, if you're going to do it, you might as well overdo it, right?
Yes.
Now these guys should be last two. I don't think actually. Did I miss those on both rounds here? I don't think I broke them loose either.
One thing I will always say I'm amazed by when working on the internals of an engine is how easily stuff does still come apart.
Oh,
As
yeah.
opposed to, I don't know, the rust bucket.
It's amazing spending its entire life soaked in oil.
Even if the oil's a little on the sluggy side, it's still better than Midwest rust.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm almost a little envious of these guys that all they do all day is engines. I mean, it's very precise, tedious stuff. But the fact that, most of it comes apart pretty easily. Right now, sometimes this requires just a little encouragement. I have to use the harder side of the mallet here. Resisting the urge to grab a bigger hammer. There it goes.
Yeah. Usually be grabbing a screwdriver to use as a pry bar, so it says a lot about my choices.
Yeah, it's amazing how, depending on the situation, sometimes prying can be much more gentle, and sometimes just a good tap versus prying stuff can score things or bend things. Sometimes just a little impact is all that it takes. So now you'll see it's a pretty serious piece of material here. For an engine that as we were saying makes just over 100 horsepower. I mean, that's an incredible amount of steel that they put into this.
And what's kind of innately beautiful about that is you can't really get it wrong. Unlike the Miata ones that you just showed, where it has to have a very specific order.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, Corey, is each one of these bearings is very specifically machined, the orientation, the alignment, and they, when these are all individual, not only you have to put them on the correct one, but also, in every individual one can go on backwards, and the way that they're machined, even putting the right one on backwards will absolutely not work properly. It'll usually end up binding, and typically the way that's discovered is when you're reassembling the engine and you go to rotate it to do something else, you'll find it's just locked. Not that I've ever done that, but it at least presents itself pretty early on in the process and gives you a chance to do a redo. But that is a very cool thing about this. You've got this oil port over here on this side, and that's actually the oil feed. So, would you mind manning the camera?
Yeah, sure.
So you can see right down here, you can kind of track the whole path where the oil we showed the pickup goes into here, into the pump, goes over to the filter, and then from the filter, you've got this big port here, which lines up with this and actually feeds oil. That's what this tube is here, feeds oil to all the bearings as you're going along. So between the location of that and that they're all linked together, it's almost, I would say almost idiot proof as far as getting it all lined up back together in the right place when you're ready for reassembly. Although, there we go. I thought maybe I had locked it in there again. Cool, so now that we got the main caps out of there, now we can see very clearly what we're looking at. We've got, you know, the crankshaft itself down the middle here, and then we were working on separating. This is what we were separating a few minutes ago. Very similar concept. The rods have a cap that goes on the back, and these are absolutely specific to an individual rod and to orientation as well. So
Now, I know on Miatas, those all very nicely have some direction on them. Is
yeah.
that also the case on Hondas?
Oh, thank you. So these, a lot of times what they'll do, yes, okay. So this is very classic. Okay, actually, I'm gonna stop myself. I was gonna say this is exactly the same as the way the Miatas do it, but in this case it's not. This was actually a number that was stamped on there. And so that will give you absolute definition. It looks like that was a number 3. We'll see when we get the other side out. Is that not only, you know, if you grab the wrong one, you know, it's like a puzzle, right? It's not going to line up right. And then on top of that, if you flip it, right, it will, you'll see that the number doesn't match up. So we're going to drop this one out just to sort of finish up that point. So now that will just push right through. We've collected a little bit of oil in it here. So there's the piston itself. So just to sort of finish that point that we were talking about. That when you put these back together, they'll very nicely, now these are kind of pressed together. But you get the idea there. That makes it incredibly clear that not only are they oriented right, but they're matched up, that this one goes with that. Cool. Now this is something I'm curious about, because even amongst Honda engines, they're not all exactly the same. So this one does happen, it's labeled number 3, and it does happen to be cylinder number 3. You typically start from the front of the engine, cylinder 1, 2. So this was number 3, we'll see when we pull the other ones out. Sometimes the numbers have to do with you know, when they were made, or, you know, I'm trying to think what else they would mark that, but
Maybe firing order?
potentially. Oh, I got it kind of stuck. But I'm gonna put that aside for now. So that was number 3. That's gonna make that easy to remember.
We do still have that over on this table if you want it.
Oh, that's a good point. Alright. So now what we're gonna take a look at, let's go number, what should be number 2 here. Oh, this one's number 3 also. So that must be, that's what I was saying. It may have to do with either the, you know, batch number or possibly the weight of it. Sometimes they'll have sort of batches, and when they check them, actually the weight is a very good point, because these all need to be within, you know, typically a gram or 2 of each other to make sure the engine's balanced. So sometimes that could be the case that what they'll do is, you know, they'll make a whole bunch of them, and they'll break them into sort of like buckets of where, okay, if it's between this weight and this weight, it's a number 1. If it's between this and this, it's a number 2. And so then when they build an engine, you grab 3 of them that are number 3, they're all going to be within kind of that same tolerance without having to remeasure everything. You know,
If all these have number 3 on them, they'll probably.
yeah, then that theory will make sense. Like I said, all the manufacturers, even amongst Honda engines, do it a little different. D-series that I built about a year or so ago, I don't believe actually had those marks on it, but it was about a 15-year newer, oh no, 10 years newer than this one. And then this is actually a pretty cool example that this happened to pop apart while we're in here, that this is the actual bearing. And it's got some marks on the back, They usually do that just from heat. That's not really anything to worry about. But this is the actual bearing surface itself. And you can see,
You put it in backwards?
I did put it in backwards. Good thing I'm not putting this back together. But it does have a little alignment tab there that keeps it lined up. But what you can see here is, you know, these bearings are actually in pretty remarkable shape. This sort of dark gray color is usually the color that they actually come from the factory. And you can see, I'm hoping that the camera picks that up, just slight little dots in there, a little bit of pitting and wear. But again, for 200,000 miles, you know, this dark gray is like the original coating.
Does this make it stand out anymore?
Yeah, you can see just a little bit of pitting on there, but I mean, that's really, you know, remarkable condition. All right, so we'll do the same trick. Pop that guy through there. Then we kind of glossed over it on the other one. Oh, there's one of our nuts from before. Kind of glossed over it before, but just a real quick sort of anatomy of a piston. You've got sort of 3 sets of rings here. You've got the top ring, which does most of your sealing as far as the combustion itself. You'll see these are actually like spring-loaded, so they keep their tension when they're in the cylinder itself. And then the second ring here, this is what is designed to keep the oil. You see there's a lot of oil on this side, and even with it just sitting like this second ring kept the oil from getting passed into the combustion chamber. And then the third ring, it's actually usually a set of 3 rings kind of crammed in there as one, which that holds a little pocket of oil in there. So as things are moving, it keeps it all lubricated. And so then the other ring is just like a barrier to keep it. And you can see the coloration, where it just, you know, that ring's done a really nice job keeping all the oil from getting to the other side there.
And then, just as a personal note,
Yeah.
when a ring is stuck, it's usually because this is like stuck all the way shut.
Yeah, typically, if you're having either oil burning issues, as Corey is suffering right now in his Miata, or your lack of compression, that usually has to do with these rings. Either one of 2 things: they can wear, or you know, they sit pretty tightly in these grooves, and if you get too much carbon built up, they can actually stay compressed. They're no longer springing out against the walls. And so typically, in Corey's case, his engine seems to have good compression, which is this top ring, keeping all the combustion gases in the cylinder. You know, this car runs very well. Compression numbers look good. But this second ring seems to be either stuck or having some sort of issue, worn out, and it's letting an excessive amount of oil get into the cylinder. And so that's something that maybe in a future video is the rebuild of Corey's engine, and maybe a turbo too, depending on Christmas bonuses. So, but overall, you know, nice condition. One of the other things we look at is what's called the skirt here. And this is where the piston, this is really the only place that the piston regularly contacts the surface inside of the cylinder. And you can see again here, there's really not much to see. You know, there's not any scoring, you know, no polishing. You know, it really looks like it's been quite healthy. So this side you can see just a little bit of contact there, which is normal. It is made to contact there. But, you know, very minimal of wear. So. All right, so got a couple more pistons in here. If everything that we're seeing lines up, these are probably both going to be number 3. Yep, we got another number 3 there. Oh, lost the bearing. This thing's just slightly more stubborn. What's up?
Compare them to a Miata. Actually, I think yours actually looks better than this one. This one has a little bit more
Yeah.
scratchy.
Oh, there's that nice smell.
Yeah. The when we took the main caps off, that nice smell showed back up.
I still think it's like burnt popcorn.
This piston, for some reason, is being just a little more stubborn than the other ones. Give it just a little tap here.
It's not moving. Want me to try and push it back up, maybe? Or, never mind, it's moving now.
Come on now.
It's right almost level with the surface. It literally came on and came back in.
Really?
Yeah.
I wonder if one of the rings is like getting hung up. This one might actually be a little more interesting to look at.
Oh, she's coming.
There it is. Good catch. So now, that was
Good drop.
that was the bearing that fell out of the other side of the cap. Oh, there's bolts in there too. Now I don't think any of that is why it was sticking in there. I'm not exactly sure. But the rings look like they're in nice shape, moving freely. One of the other ring issues that can show up, which isn't really a ring issue, is what's called the ring lands. These places on sort of either side of the ring, those can become damaged. Usually that's because of some sort of combustion issue, pinging, knocking. You can start to lose chunks there. And then of course the piston ring is not going to seal because it's not supported properly. So it's...
This one actually had a little bit more wear than the others.
Right? Yeah, right.
No, I already got it.
Okay, so that's a little more what I'd be expecting, based on the mileage. You can see there's a little bit of polishing going on there. Again, that's not anything that I would be worried about. On 220,000 miles, that actually looks pretty nice. So, all right, so this is another number 3 piston. Or sorry, well, piston and connecting rod.
Yeah.
Number 1. And you guessed it, number 3.
So they're all 3.
Oh, you know what it is? I think the crankshaft was just in the way a little bit. Ready to catch it? Give it a little shove here. There you go. Always helps to have a helper with this part of the job. It's usually the first time you go and do this, you just launch a piston straight into the floor. And sometimes when they're stubborn like that, it's a little much to try and catch it in. But
A lot of debris, but that's expected right around there.
yeah, that's what we were showing before you came back. You can really see, so that second ring is what prevents the oil from getting into the chamber, and the first ring is what kind of keeps all the combustion gases and your compression up. And you can see there where it's so much darker on that side because it's really been keeping all the oil on the other side.
There it is.
Yeah, there's the oil. I may have made a mess of
Got
that.
the other cap there.
And one of the nuts fell down.
All right, so at this point, the crankshaft, so now you can get a really good image here of the crankshaft, how that works. So you've got the pistons are paired up, which gives the engine balance. So you've got 2 here, 2 here, and they're always moving exactly opposite of each other. And that's again why keeping the weight the same is always critical. So now you've got a certain amount of weight on these 2 and on these 2, and they're 180 degrees apart. Keeps them nicely balanced.
And how you're turning it right now also shows kind of how the main bearings get lubricated.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where these oil passages come through, and we were talking about that a little bit earlier. The oil comes in through here, it goes into we'll just take another quick look at that. Or it goes right into the main caps, and then it gets fed across to the crankshaft. And then the wild thing about this too is that then the crankshafts actually have passages within them. So all those main bearings here in the middle are fed off of this oil feed, and then the oil flows through the crankshaft and into, or comes out of these holes here to feed the rod bearings that we just took apart. And so that's where a lot of people are familiar with the term rod knock. And what happens is, if for some reason this port in here gets clogged or you get a little low on oil, or for some reason you're just not getting enough oil here, the bearing will wear out, and then you'll get just a little bit of play in there, and that's what you hear is basically the connecting rod itself banging up and down against this. And usually by the time you hear that stuff, it's you're pretty much beyond the point of salvation.
Your oil
as it
filter's a
were.
little loose.
Not too bad.
Well, I took it off by hand.
All right, so at this point, we've got all the bearings off of the crankshaft, and all that's left is we've got this housing here that holds on the rear main seal. Actually, we'll take a quick look at that. That's another sort of buzzword that a lot of people hear about, is like a rear main seal leak. So that's the orange here is this seal. So you can see as the crankshaft spins, that oil seal keeps the oil from getting outside of the engine. And that's something that can wear out over time, wear out, dry out, just like any of the other plastic bits, and then cause a leak. And it's always a pretty nasty one because the transmission bolts onto this side. So getting access to this seal, it's a pretty inexpensive part. It's relatively simple to do the seal itself, but to get access to it involves typically dropping the transmission and pulling the clutch and flywheel out of there. So what we're going to do is we're going to just pop off the bracket that holds that in place. That's just a simple little bracket that holds that seal. Let's see. And these seals actually have like a little spring inside of them that holds that tension. So it's a rubber seal, but then it's got sort of a spring tension on it to really make sure that it doesn't leak. Because as you can see, I mean, it's a lot of surface area, and like I said, they go through a lot of effort. Design that in a way that it won't leak because it is usually such a big job if you need to replace that. And also that same design with the rubber lip with the spring, it almost becomes like kind of a rubber band spring in there. That's very common. I mean, all the seals on any of the end of the crankshaft, the camshaft, they all have a very similar design like that. So now the last thing, at this point, we may be able to move a little bit. But at this point, the only thing holding it in is the oil pump, which actually, it's this entire surface out here. All of this is the oil pump. So it's got a couple of 10s. Looks like that's all. Gosh, I've got the mallet. All right, if you want to just give that a little tap in the back here.
I don't work well under pressure. Obviously.
There you go. Perfect. And you can see there's little dowel pins. That's kind of what we were working against there. It helps with the alignment. That's kind of what was holding it. And then you'll see it just use a really thin coat of RTV here to seal it. But so that's again, you were talking about the water pump. This is a little more going on, but there's kind of not a lot here. That's the oil pump. I mean, that's like the heart of the engine, keeping the oil flowing. We just talked about any lack of oil flow. I mean, even for a moment, is pretty catastrophic. So you can see the crankshaft has a flat side on it here. And that drives this, which that's actually the pump
How
itself.
about this?
Oh, and here's one. I believe it's from a Miata.
Nope, GTR.
Oh, that's the GTR. I was gonna say it's a little bigger than I would have thought for a Miata. So that's the one off of the GTR. So that's, if we pulled this cover, see on this one, just pull these Phillips screws off of here. Oh, it's just got the cover there. That's what's inside there. So as that turns, and if memory serves, it's called a G-rotor pump. So as that spins around, basically takes in the oil. I want to misspeak here. The pickup on this one. Where's the pickup on this one?
That is a
Oh.
good question. Actually, I think.
Doesn't seem to have a tiny hole on top right there.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
want to say it's here.
Oh,
and then
yeah,
here
yeah, of
could
course.
be the-
Yeah, that's where the pickup is. Yeah, yeah, I'm looking at it upside down here. Anyway, so as it spins, takes in the oil, and it's kind of bizarre, but it actually compresses it, between this. With that plate on the other side, it's kind of sealed, and then pumps the oil out into the block. So, very simple mechanism, incredibly critical to the function of the engine. So now, if we got everything else here, the crankshaft should just come right out. There you go.
Don't drop it.
So,
No, I believe we are going to be reusing this one, so.
yes, of all the parts that we took out, this is definitely one of the ones that we will be reusing after a thorough cleaning. All right. So, you got any questions or
No.
Corey, any comments?
No, we're doing okay over here.
All right, good.
There isn't really much left to that at this point, is there?
No, I mean, at this point, we'll give it a little twirl around here. Now, we are going to fully strip some of the rest of the stuff.
Thrust
A few,
washers.
oh, the thrust washers. I know, I'm so excited. So the thrust washers, since we've got it here, as you can see, easily overlooked, but very critical piece here. So the thrust washers sit down in here. There's just, you can see, like just a barely little step that fits down into there. And that's what keeps the crankshaft from sliding forward and backwards. And this is, like the other bearings and stuff in the engine, this is a wear item. And it's something we will be replacing while we're in here. But again, like most of the stuff in this car, see a little bit of contact there, a little bit of polishing, but nothing to worry about. But that is another important piece. Then you can see here, this is the other half of the main bearings. They'll just slide out of here. So you can see these have the
Alright, I'm getting pizza.
hole in there to allow the oil flow, and then a groove as well to kind of trap a pocket of oil in there. Now what's interesting about these is in some engines, they only have the hole on one side. So this is where we can see, this is what we were talking about. The oil flowing through here, then it comes out these holes to feed the bearing. What's interesting is on this one, it's not always the case, but the bottom side bearings have the hole as well in this, but if we pull this up, we see there's nothing for it to flow through. But it just makes it so then they're identical. Probably just another thing Honda does to make it a little more idiot-proof. Because if you can imagine, if the bearings had a hole only on one of the two halves, if you put it on the wrong side, you wouldn't get any oil flow.
They really had no faith in us.
Do you want to pull out all of these bearings before you rotate it?
No, they'll be all right for now.
We'll definitely pull out at least that other thrust washer then.
Oh,
I got it. Oh man, that is some old oil.
yeah. So at this point, it's basically just a naked block.
You could remove this bracket if you really, really wanted to. You could
Yeah.
remove whatever.
So this is kind of cool. This is actually part of the crankcase ventilation system. So
I'm just
oh yeah, so you can actually see this port here feeds into it.
Yep.
So the combustion gases can flow through there, and then this is actually what feeds back through to one of our earlier discussions about the intake manifold, which I lost away. But I think this is something very cool and somewhat unique to older Hondas like this, is then that feeds through. So this feeds into a port on the bottom side of the intake manifold, which this is kind of an interesting setup where it, if the other side of this hose fits into this, and all this is just a pass-through that then hooks in to the PCV valve, which just controls it controls the airflow there. So basically, that it doesn't suck a vacuum through the crankcase. It'll only let pressure come out and not any vacuum. And so then that feeds into the intake manifold. So the idea is that when those gases are escaping and a little bit of oil vapors in there, this is supposed to trap the oil and let it drain back in to the engine versus going to the intake manifold. You'll see it's, as we saw here, there's still plenty that got through. So it's not foolproof, but it's a cool thing. A lot of other cars will just run that hose directly. Oh, there's pizza here. Now you're just teasing them. So we are going to completely strip this down and pull this bracket off. We'll pull off this canister. We're actually going to probably plug this hole and run some other lines. Yeah, we got a couple of sensors here. I'm going to say off the top of my head, this one is definitely oil pressure. You can see this is where the oil filter screws in, and then there's a passage here that contains pressurized oil. So this is your oil pressure sensor. This one, I'm gonna have to take a mulligan on that one. It's not gonna be coolant. The coolant sensors are actually, you can see right here, they're in the back of the head. So we've got, those are checking the coolant temperature. This could very well be a knock sensor, just off the top of my head here. But as it doesn't really connect to anything that's flowing, it just sort of hooked into the side of the block, so that'll pick up vibration and give the engine's ECU sort of a warning or heads up if it's detecting detonation or knock or something going wrong with the combustion.
So then when all that's out, you could send the entire block itself to be machined or spray it down. I think you said you have an ultrasonic cleaner you sometimes run them through.
Yep. Yeah, so we'll strip all this off. This is part of the cooling system here. The thermostat is inside of there. So we'll get all that stuff out of the way, get it cleaned, and we're gonna measure it. We haven't fully decided what type of pistons we're gonna run at this point, or exactly what size. And part of the reason we hadn't decided yet is we wanted to see the condition of the cylinders. And these cylinders are really in incredible shape. So we're gonna go through and measure them, make sure that you're measuring both directions, make sure that they're round, make sure they're not tapered. Sometimes even though they look nice, sometimes they can be a little bit out of shape. But this block may not actually require much work at all, which would be a nice, take a nice chunk out of the budget, leave some more room for other goodies. I don't know, I think at this point, I don't think I have anything left to share. I don't know. Kasha, Drake, any questions? Corey? All right. Excellent. Well, thanks everybody for watching. Thanks to my team. Made this possible. Quick little shot of the garage. Maybe we'll do a follow-up video, walk around some of the projects we've got going on in here. But